Okay, so in the previous lesson, we learned how to solve simple trig equations using our trig chart. Now we're going to learn how to solve a little more complicated trig equations. One thing you need to notice is that we're going to be completely in radians for these example problems. And you're given that by this interval right here, 0 to 2 pi. Okay, so whenever we're doing these more complicated trig equations, when it's just not cosine is equal to a number, you always have to isolate the trig just like it's your variable in regular algebra equations. So we got to get it into that form that we already learned. Okay. So your first step, what we're going to do on this one, 2 sine of theta plus square root of 3 is equal to 0. We're going to subtract square root of 3 to the other side. Okay. So we get 2 sine of theta is equal to a negative square root of 3. And we're going to divide both sides by 2 because it's being multiplied. So it looks like a form we know how to deal with. Okay. So sine is negative in quadrant 3 and quadrant 4. Your reference angle. Sine is equal to square root of 3 over 2 at pi over 3. Okay, we get that from our trig chart. And a quadrant 3 answer is going to be pi plus pi over 3. And a quadrant 4 answer is going to be 2 pi minus pi over 3. And so those are your two answers. Next question, 4 cosine squared theta is equal to 1. So we got to isolate the trig first. So we're going to divide both sides by 4. So we get cosine squared theta is equal to 1/4. Now, from algebra, we know that to get rid of a squared, we have to square root both sides. Okay? So when I square root, I get cosine of theta is equal to plus or minus. Now, when I take the square root of a fraction, I square root the top. Square root of 1 is 1. Square root of 4 is 2. Okay? Now, you cannot forget this plus or minus. So anytime I take an even root when I'm solving an equation, you have to always put plus or minus. You always have to put plus or minus. You always have to put plus or minus. Okay, several of you are going to miss that, and I need to make sure that you don't miss that. Okay, so what this plus or minus entails is we're going to have quadrant 1, we're going to have quadrant 2, we're going to have quadrant 3, and we're going to have a quadrant 4 answer. Now, cosine is equal to 1/2 at pi over 3, and we get that from our trig chart. Cosine is equal to 1/2 at pi over 3. So quadrant 1 answer is going to be pi over 3. Quadrant 2 answer is going to be pi minus pi over 3, which is 2 pi over 3. Quadrant 3 answer is going to be pi plus pi over 3, which is 4 pi over 3. And quadrant 4 answer is going to be 2 pi minus pi over 3. So 3 times 2 is 6 minus 1 is 5. Okay? So that is how we deal with the plus or minus. We're going to have all 4 quadrant answers whenever we have when we take a square root. Okay, next one. Tangent squared is equal to 1/3. So to get rid of a squared, we square root both sides. So you get tangent of theta is equal to plus or minus the square root of 1/3. Like we did in the previous example, when we square root a fraction, we square root the top, we square root the bottom. Now, square root of 1 is 1. Square root of 3 is square root of 3. Now, we look at our trig chart and we don't see that 1 over square root of 3 is on our trig chart. So what we have to do is rationalize the denominator. Okay? So when we rationalize with square roots, we multiply the top and the bottom by whatever the square root is. So now I have something that looks like it's on my trig chart. Okay? So we're going to have all 4 quadrant answers because we have the plus or minus. Your reference angle, alpha. So tangent is equal to square root of 3 over 3 at pi over 6. And you can get that from your trig chart. Tangent is equal to square root of 3 over 3, pi over 6. Okay, so quadrant 1 answer is pi over 6. Quadrant 2 answer is pi minus pi over 6, which is 5 pi over 6. 6 times 1 is 6, minus 1 is 5. Pi plus pi over 6, which is 7 pi over 6. And a quadrant 4 answer is going to be 2 pi minus pi over 6, which is 11 pi over 6. And that is how we do this question. Okay, next one. We have to isolate the trig first, so we're going to subtract 1 to the other side. Okay, and then we're going to divide both sides by square root of 3. Okay, now I know that 1 over square root of 3 is not on my trig chart because I have my trig chart memorized. And so I'm going to have to rationalize it just like I did on the previous problem. So I'm going to multiply the bottom and the top by square root of 3. And I get negative square root of 3 over 3. So cotangent is negative in quadrant 2 and quadrant 4. Your reference angle is going to be pi over 3. Okay, we get that from our trig chart. Cotangent is equal to square root of 3 over 3 at pi over 3. Okay, quadrant 2 answer is going to be pi minus pi over 3, which is 2 pi over 3. And a quadrant 4 answer is going to be 2 pi minus pi over 3, which is 5 pi over 3. And we only have 2 answers on that one. There wasn't any sort of plus or minus. Okay, next one. 2 sine squared minus 3 sine of theta plus 1 is equal to 0. What the heck do I do here? Well, we're going to have to factor. Okay, so the way this thing's going to factor down is going to be 2 sine of theta and sine of theta. It's a minus plus, so it factors to a minus minus. And you put a 1 and a 1 right there. Okay, so we're going to set each one of these parentheses equal to 0. And we're going to solve 2 separate little equations. Okay, so we get sine of theta, we're going to add 1 divided by 2 is equal to 1/2. And we got sine of theta is equal to 1. Now, sine is going to be positive in quadrant 1 and 2. Your reference angle for this is going to be pi over 6. Plug in a pi over 6 here. And quadrant 2 answer is going to be pi minus pi over 6. So you get 5 pi over 6. Okay. Next one, where is sine equal to 1? Okay, so sine is positive in quadrant 1 and quadrant 2. Alpha is going to be equal to pi over 2, because sine is equal to 1 at pi over 2. Okay, so it's going to be pi over 2. And quadrant 2 answer is pi minus pi over 2, which is pi over 2. Okay, so on this one, you actually have 3 answers. Now, if you want to make this a little bit easier for yourself, if you're freaked out by the whole sine thing and factoring, I could have just substituted. So I'm going to say u is equal to sine. Okay, so I would be factoring this expression right here. And you can do box method or you can do PSF. They both work the same way. So your product would be 2u squared. Your sum is a negative 3u. So what are the factors of 2u squared that when you add them together give you a negative 3u? So your factors would end up being a negative 2u and u. Okay. So that's pretty much your box method or your PSF if you want to do it out to this side like that. Later in the course, we're going to spend about 3 sections on factoring. Okay, so you are expected to know how to factor previous to this class, so make sure you know how to factor. Okay, next question is 2 cosine squared theta plus cosine of theta is equal to 0. Now, we're going to factor by GCF. They have a cosine in common. Remember, you can't factor anything out unless it is set equal to 0. So we do 2 cosine of theta plus 1 is on the inside. Okay, and I like to double check myself. If I distribute this out, I get the same thing. So I'm going to set the outside equal to 0 and then the parentheses equal to 0. So cosine of theta is equal to 0. And I have this other little equation over here. 2 cosine of theta plus 1 is equal to 0. So cosine is equal to 0. Your reference angle is going to be pi over 2 from your trig chart. And it's also going to be, so your reference angle is pi over 2. I like to do it this way. 0 really doesn't have a sign, so you would have all 4 quadrant answers. I just like to ask, at what points is my x-coordinate equal to 0? So it's going to be pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2. Okay, so this comes out to be cosine of theta is equal to a negative 1/2. Cosine is negative in quadrant 2 and quadrant 3. Cosine is equal to 1/2 at pi over 3. So we get a pi minus pi over 3. It's 2 pi over 3. And a quadrant 3 answer is pi plus pi over 3, which is 4 pi over 3. Okay, as we go through this, if you're looking at the homework and if I didn't show this step like right here, subtracting -1 and divided by square root of 3, that's because you should be able to solve simple equations. If you need to show those steps, be my guest. I just care about the trig right now. One other note that we're going to come across. Say we're looking at this. Cosine squared. Okay? This means it's like this. Those are the same thing. They're just written in a different notation. But it does not equal that. Okay? This means that the angle is squared. So make sure you're writing it correctly as you're doing these problems, because once we get to identities, we're going to be doing a lot of this. Okay? So that's been solving more trig equations, example problems. In the next lesson, we're going to get into how to use the calculator to solve these same types of questions. Thanks, and have a good day.